This is an important one because it deals with happiness and the current state of human beings as it relates to doubting whether happiness is even possible for us human beings. Because if you really have eyes, if you're really staying current with whatever's happening with the world and what many have already begun feeling, what those who were already sensitive to it been saying, which is the tightening of the bottleneck as far as the pressures that human beings today are under. So it's natural for the frustration gauge to increase exponentially. And this is the temptation where the all or nothing thinking comes in, and the person, or us, humans, at least some of us, start to doubt whether happiness is possible. Happiness is definitely possible, and for a long period of time. These are temporary states that we are undergoing. This is not a promise of some utopian reality that one day could come for us humans, a fairy tale-like thing. No, happiness is definitely for us to experience. Now, the world in its current state, of course, we shouldn't be, blind to whatever's going on, where human beings have become simply, for some people, some groups, powerful people, the majority of humans, we have become like a liability or a resource. I mean, that's what companies in the US have been calling humans. There's in companies, in corporations, there's sections that handle the human personnel, which are not called human personnel, they're called Human Resources Department. Resource. So human beings are resources in the modern world. Meanwhile, corporations have become entities. They actually are seen by governments, at least in the US, as an entity, as a person, as an individual. That's a joke. But that's how the world works. So if you have been around for a few generations on this planet, and especially in the workforce, and you're seeing the changes that are happening, the way we are being pushed to becoming more and more consumers, simply for that reason, to buy in things and to be exposed to whatever influences out there, of course, sooner or later, it gets to you. You see the world that's becoming less and less safe. The world that has become some type of a dictatorship. We're going back. We are back to colonial times, where whoever has a resource, it doesn't matter, no rules or laws apply, and we just go and get it. So this is making people even more anxious, afraid, and now happiness is even being pushed further and further away from us as a possibility. I am trying to say that happiness is more than just a faint possibility. When we are talking about life, we have to also consider the bigger scope, bigger than the human life, that is. because of our karma, because of this planet, the collective karma, you can say, where you have beings born as human beings this time around, but having committed certain actions, intentional actions over time. When I say time, it's very long, the way we understand it in Buddhism. But there's a certain frequency or flavor to the actions committed, meaning there's a similarity. You can even call it vibration of these beings who are being born or who are born in the world today. And that's where the commonality brings with it a state of affairs that we see around us taking place, where there is less virtue, where there are rulers in the world that are non-virtuous. They lie through their teeth. Meanwhile, the public knows better. And you don't have to be very educated to see that discrepancy. So what I'm trying to say is, the world in its current status is the result of the population of the world at the moment having committed similar actions, similar non-virtuous actions, which we are now having to deal with. Of course, here is where you have to allow in your mind some room. And this is what hopefully this portion of what I'm saying could help expand the view that we hold in our minds, that this is it, we're stuck with this and we're going down. No, that's not the case. If we allow it to be, if we, at least within us, in our approach. So here I am going to emphasize the importance of what lies beyond the human life. That's what I said, we need to open up our scope of understanding of life without denying the facts that are taking place in the world, where there's so much injustice, so much unfairness, so many lies, domination of human beings, abuse of human beings, where the leaders are no longer leaders. They're no longer representing law. They're no longer representing what is right. There's no justice in the world. These are terms that people use. So that makes us very depressed. So many people are going to drugs. It's not because of the drugs being so appealing. That also has to be said, because the person is feeling powerless. That's another reason why human beings are driven to consume information, data, and get themselves agitated to the core, which takes them back to the opposite pole of happiness, which is suffering, pain. So having stated those things, having acknowledged the facts, we have to be welcoming of the grand possibility. Not just a possibility, but in many cases, inevitability of happiness to be experienced. If not in this life that we're living now, then in the heavenly realms. Now, this is not dismissing the possibility or the goal of pursuing happiness in our lives here and now, in this birth, in the world, as human beings. This is not negating that. However, this is expanding. Let's be clear about that. This is expanding our scope of not just accepting, but welcoming the reality that exists beyond the human birth. I say this because the Buddha has again and again emphasized the importance of acknowledging and to anchor yourself on the fact that the Devas exist, the heavenly realms exist. What in Western culture are called gods or angels, they exist. Those realms exist, and they are far greater in number than the possibility of human life, human planets, human inhabited worlds in the universe. But because of our narrow vision and what we accept, we've even eliminated that possibility. And what I am trying to say is that's wrong. Happiness does exist for us to be experienced. Now, in his conversations with so many householders, so many people, so many practitioners who would come to him, to the Buddha, for whatever reason, overwhelmed, however, commonly experiencing suffering, to pull the person out of that misery, to show them the full picture, the Buddha would describe again and again the various different realms above the human. Because we can easily get stuck, saturated in our thinking that this is it, this is the only life. This is the reductionist thinking which human beings are plagued with. And that has to change. That must change if we want to be happy. Modern day philosophies in the world are not supportive of a happy lifestyle. It's become very much indulgence-based. Indulgence and happiness are not the same. Becoming self-absorbed, self-centered, self-interest only, pushing and propelling society, the world today, that is where the source of the inequity in the world comes from. The injustices we see is because people in power have reached a place where they can pull and push and get away with things and indulge in the resources they now control. Now they control. Tomorrow it's no longer going to be in their hands. And they're going to have to face that. So it's misery upon misery and misery waiting for them. That is not the happiness that I'm referring to. That's not happy. The happiness that the Buddha talked about beyond this human world involves the heavenly realms. And the Buddha was very specific. This is something that people do not talk about within Buddhist circles. In some cases, they don't know. For example, the layer above human beings, layer of the realm of existence, that is, of heavenly realms, is the one that is called the realm of the four great kings. Now, the human life, if you take just a single day and a night that is lived, experienced in the realm of the four great kings, equals 50 years of human life. Just try to absorb that. Take that in. 50 years of our lives here on this planet, of the average, human being on this planet Earth, 50 years spent here, a whole lifetime, equal a single day and night spent in the realm of the four great kings. Now, multiply that by 30, which makes up a month that is spent in the realm of the four great kings. The Chatu Maharaja realm. They're also called the four protectors, guardians, the great guardians of, well, you can say the solar system. "30 of those, 50 years, human 50 years, makes up a month spent in the realm of the four great kings." And we still not reached a year spent there. So you take those 30 and you multiply it by 12, and now you have a single year spent in the realm of the four great kings. Now, bear in mind that the lifespan of the Devas, the average lifespan of the Devas living in those realms, on average is 500 celestial years. So you take that 12 and you multiply it by 500. You see how vast? When we narrow our vision, when we miniaturize the possibilities for us, and we are accepting of the meager crumbs of life and experience, when they have persuaded us that life is all about, you work from 9 to 5 this is after you have gone up and gone to school from an early age, where they train us to get that 9 to 5 cycle from a young age. Then they have you spend another 60 years or so, 50 years or so, working 9 to 5 to make something happen of your life, and then retire. Meanwhile, they're extracting, treating you as a tax-paying machine, consumer. Of course, the person is going to become less and less accepting of a grander possibility for themselves, of true happiness. No wonder these teachings have been shunned or banned or laughed at. That's another thing that they use. That's a strategy. They laugh at the possibility of life beyond this human jail cell that we're in. So happiness does exist, but we have to remove ourselves from the thinking that this is what I'm going to amount to, or my happiness comes from electing such and such a person, or having a fair government. No. Most of them are corrupt, if not all of them. I don't have control over that. I have control over what I think and what I feel and how I gauge the trajectory of my life and where I want to go. I'm not going to believe what they tell me to believe. So already you are releasing yourself from the shackles that have been imposed upon you. Even if you're not a big fan of or a believer of other, possibilities of other forms of life beyond the human, despite the fact that you have dogs and cats and insects and all kinds of beings around you, albeit you're human, they're not. You're accepting the fact that those life forms do exist. Let's say you don't extend that to life beyond this life when we die. Nevertheless, the happiness does exist. And it's your call. You have the control over what you accept and welcome. Even as a remote possibility, there were atheists, I wouldn't say atheists the way we understand today, but there were people who were very skeptical, but nevertheless they really practiced the Dhamma that the Buddha taught. They practiced virtue. They practiced the 5 precepts. But when it came to the Devas, they had a harder time to accept. So the Buddha would have them focus on the 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. The Buddha, the Dhamma meaning the teachings that he was imparting, he was showing people, explaining things. And the Sangha were the noble disciples who were already sitting around the Buddha. The people were seeing them. They were seeing how pure these individuals were around them, walking this. Their behavior was totally 100% pure. So you can take refuge in that. But the Buddha didn't stop there. He said also, you have to acknowledge the fact that the Devas exist. Now, some people didn't resonate with that because they were too stuck in their concretized ways of thinking. For those, the Buddha would have another resource for them, and that is the person's own virtue. This is key. That's one other reason why we practice the 5 precepts, to purify ourselves. It's undeniable when you have undergone the temptations and you said, no, I'm not going to stoop down low into doing something so inhumane. I will stop myself from doing that. That makes you stronger. You are becoming a protector of yourself and the world around you. You don't do that. You don't steal when you have the opportunity. You don't. When other people, a lot more powerful, are bending over backwards to go ahead and steal entire continents, resources in other people's countries, steal other people's bread, shamelessly, without realizing. Meanwhile, they're getting older and older and closer to death. One of these days, they're going to be hit with a stroke or something, and they're going to die, croak and die. A miserable death, mind you. And I'm not even going to go talking about where they will open up their eyes. For that, the Buddha has countless other suttas, discourses, where he describes what will happen to such individuals who break the 5 precepts, because they turn themselves impure when we break precepts. It has nothing to do with the world around you, in a sense. The impurity, the contamination that you expose yourself to because of this behavior that is unwholesome, damaging, harmful, hurtful to you and to others. Already you broke yourself from the possibility of experiencing happiness, for which reason you are dragged and dropped, deposited into hell. But my focus is addressing happiness today, given this question. But by the way, that's the first level I said, okay? The first heavenly realm you can think of above us. Because human beings, depending on their evolutionary cycle of the planet, that is, of the galaxy, of the solar system, we have, in the default mode, when things are going well, we have the same possibilities or opportunities for either pleasure or pain. Now, if you go below us into the animal realms, the pleasure, again, the karma of the person or the being has everything to do with this. The balance can shift and does shift. For example, if you're a rat or a mouse, you will have, I wouldn't say opportunities, but you will have occasions where you're experiencing more pain than pleasure. Why? Because animals always live with fear. Even if you're a lion, if you're a whale, if you're a bear, if you're a cat, if you're a rat or a mouse, you're always on the run, trying to protect yourself. That is very agitated. You have to go out there, get your food, reproduce this and that, and then dominate. Be territorial. These are very animalistic instincts. So the being does not have that many chances of experiencing pleasure, because they're always under threat from some predator. And if you go lower than animals, it's even worse. There's hardly any pleasure at all, but more pain. And you go down, you're going down the gradient. So you have now purely painful existence. And the higher up you go on the spectrum, and that's where I am focusing on, the higher spectrum, which are the Deva realms. So above the four great kings realm, you get to the Tavatimsa heaven, which are the realm of Lord Sakka, or in some traditions is called Lord Indra or Inda. The heaven of the 33 gods. They are ruled by Sakka. He's called the king of the Devas, king of the gods. Now, by contrast to the four great kings, a single day and single night spent or lived in the realm of the Tavatimsa heaven equals 100 years, not 50, of our years. And again, with the 30 times that, which makes up a 1 month period in the Tavatimsa, or the realm or the heaven of the 33. And then you take that 1 month and you multiply it by 12, which to make up a year spent in the Tavatimsa heaven. And you take that and you consider that alongside of the fact that a Deva in the Tavatimsa heaven has a lifespan of 1,000 years. Not ours, theirs. Taking those calculations into consideration. So 1,000 years, celestial year in Tavatimsa heaven is the normal lifespan to be spent there. So we're talking about, like right now, I don't have a calculator, but we're in the billions of years, human billions of years lifespan, we're talking. And then beyond that, you have the Yama gods, who are even higher than the Tavatimsa. And for them, it is a single day and night in their realm equals 200 years, human years. We don't have a person living up to 200 years as a human being. There was one actually recorded, but it's disputed in China, of an old man that the Chinese government has, I think, has proved that that's a real story. So they say he lived up to 270 years or 260, something like that. He died in the 50s, in the 1950s. But it's debatable whether that was true or not. So I don't know of anyone who's lived 200 years, a human being. But that is how one day, how long a single day and night is in the Yama realm. Again, with the 30 times to make up a month, and then 12 of those to make up a single year spent as a Yama god. And guess how many years the Yama god has as a lifespan? 2,000. Double the Tavatimsa lifespan. So they live 2,000 celestial years, not our years again. Meanwhile, what's happening in those realms? Happiness and delight. These are still on the sensual realm, by the way. They have their senses. They experience pleasure. The 5 carnal pleasures they experience. Pleasures of the eyes, ears, touch, sensuality. These beings, that's all. Like, the opportunities are there. there's no gauge, human gauge, that you can compare it to as to this is how much joy or delight they are exposed to constantly. Food, this and that, difficulties like sweating does not exist until the deva is about to die. Gray hair doesn't exist until they're about to die. These are in fact the signs that do occur right before the deva dies. The luster, they're all glowing, by the way. They're lustrous. And as you go up the spectrum of devas, they become even more sublime looking, more lustrous, more glowing. And their purity also makes them even glow more brightly. There was a case where a deva was born in Tavatimsavan, where King Lord Sakka lives. He is the ruler, as I said, Tavatimsavan. This is before he came to the Dhamma. And he didn't know why, but he was, he saw this other deva, but the deva was glowing brighter than him. And this deva happens to be his subject. Remember, he is the king of the devas in that realm, of the 33. To the point where he was so embarrassed that he would avoid being in the same hall, the same place as that deva. And when he was asked by his subjects, Lord, why are you not celebrating? Why are you not listening to the beautiful music you like? Why are you not here with us enjoying like you normally do? And finally he says, do you see him? I'm kind of shy to be in the same presence as him, because look how beautiful he is. And I don't know why. I'm the king, I'm supposed to be brighter, but why is he brighter? And then they find out that it was actually because that other being was a generous person in their life, in their human life. And he was generous specifically towards noble ones. Not just average people, because there's a difference between doing generous acts towards everyone, because their karma has everything to do with it, their state of mind has everything to do with it, the recipient here. And their virtue has a lot to do with this. You might be truly virtuous and really giving, and you see and something moves in your heart and you say, I have to give, and you give, you will gain the benefits. But there's a difference between you doing that to a person with low virtue or no virtue at all, to a person who has virtue plus mental cultivation to a high level, and even a difference between you doing those things with someone who has virtue and has mentally cultivated his mind to such deep levels, plus is wise. So the gradient goes up for you as to how much that return will be. It impacts even your state of being post-human life. You see, we're still on the subject of happiness here. It's such a big, it's inevitable. That's why I said it's inevitable to be happy if you're living life a certain way, but not the way that the world is teaching us today, not the way the world is pushing people to put themselves into this dark, dark corner of limitations. As you're nothing over there, you're just a machine, you're just a programmable machine, as they say. No, that's a lie. That's what I'm trying to say, that's a lie. By the way, without getting into too much, beyond the Yama gods, you have also Tushita Tushita Devas, Tushita realm, or Tusita, which is even higher, and that one is 400 human years for a single day and night spent there in that Tusita realm. And it's double of the Yama gods, by the way, in case you're wondering, the lifespan. 4,000 celestial years equals one single lifespan of a deva in that realm of Tusita. And then beyond them, you have the Nimanarati Devas. Nimanarati Devas are the Devas that typically in English we translate as the Devas, or the gods who delight in creation. You might have heard about law of attraction, and in the 90s or 80s there were books called Thus Spoke Seth, or Spake Seth, I think. And then you had the Law of Attraction series with, I think they're called Abraham Hicks, or these are the things that the movers, they were the ones who brought this whole thing about the book, or the movie, The Secret, and everybody's in the bandwagon of, law of attraction. When you narrow it down, you see the Abraham Hicks, when you listen to them, I used to listen to them as a layperson, just to be like, is there some validity to what they're saying? And then the Seth, Thus Spoke Seth, or something, I think that's what the title is for those books, series books. You see that there is a being communicating with a human. So she's being a channel. And again, I can't vouch for any of these as facts, but in case, if they are true, and the way they are talking about creation, law of creation, and the way that you listen to the lingo, the language, and they are presenting themselves as gods, as higher beings, they would qualify, they would fit, because they are in love with creating. That's what I have picked up from the few conversations I've listened to when the person was in such a thing called a trance or something. If they are true, what they're saying is true, then such higher beings would qualify as the Nimanarati Devas, which, by the way, their lifespan is just a single day and night there in their realm equals 800 human years. Not days, 800 human years. And by the way, you take that, multiply it 30 times, and then 12 to make up a year spent in that Nimanarati realm. And their lifespan is 8,000 celestial years. So you're beyond, like, I don't know how many hundreds of billion. And then beyond them, there is the Paranimmita. These are the devas that enjoy controlling the creations of these gods that I just mentioned, the Nimanarati. So the Paranimmita devas, they live even longer. And for them is 1,600 years of our life spent on this planet that equal a single day and night in that realm. And then how much? Double the 8,000, so that's 16,000 celestial years is an average lifespan. And this goes on, obviously. When you get to the Brahma realms, then thousands of years it's not a good measure, yardstick to use. What the Buddha would use are the kappas or mahakappas. These are the world cycles. What in modern parlance we could say the Big Bang, let's say one portion of the Big Bang, and then there's the expansion period, and then the contraction period. The Buddha talked about that. So that whole cycle is seen as one mahakappa. And it goes in mahakappas, like as you go up, there's even like 60,000, 60 mahakappas and things. It's like beyond anything that the human brain could conjure up as to what does that quantify as. How could you wrap your mind around that? And there's happiness. In those Brahma realms, you're beyond the sensual now. So you're in the form realms. Perceptions are there. And then even higher from those, you get to the formless realms, where there's not even perception taking place. It's a huge, unimaginably long time where you're not experiencing pain that you experience here. And when there's no pain, that's happiness. You can approach it like that as well. Now, I didn't mention most of them, of course, but some of them I did, but these comprise the 31 realms of existence. But ultimately, the Buddha taught that there is no true safety in any of these realms, but you can approach them as way stations of rest. If you're taking a long drive cross country, ever so often it's a good thing to rest, to kick your shoes off, to just, rest your body, to take in the scenery even. Because you can even get very much fixated on whatever experiences you're having now. And given the karmic states and karmic residues or consequences you and I have to deal with in this life, and the global one, of course, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's very tempting for many of us to forget that these lives exist. Remember how short the human life is. That's why the Buddha insisted. He was talking to lay people to encourage them to continue to do good deeds, starting with their mind, and then speech, and then physical deeds, actions, wholesome, beneficial actions for themselves. Why? Because the outcome is waiting for them. They decide what the outcome is. Nobody decides for us. That's the thing. That's the beauty of it. That's why he was mentioning this, for example, what I was talking about, what I was describing, the Devas, the realms of the Devas, to many of his supporters, many of his students, and like Lady Visakha, for example, Anathapindika. He was describing it to the Bhikkhus, he was describing it to so many others, and not just him. And you had highly developed Bhikkhus, monks, who were able to go and visit these realms in person to validate the teachings. And that's what, unfortunately, you do not have that many monks these days who do that, who are able to do that. That doesn't mean that simply because we don't have that many people practicing to that level of concentration to be able to physically travel to these realms, but that doesn't negate the presence of those realms. Because in deep meditation, you are able, definitely, to validate these things. To know these realms. Not just these, by the way, the heavenly delightful realms, but also the opposite, the hell realms. As I said, the animal realm is there. You can see it. You can touch it. You can hear it. But there's other realms that seep in and out, like in the case of the ghost realms. Sometimes people see, and that it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Of course it does exist. Because, some people are more sensitive, or the heaviness of the karma, the karma-laden heaviness of that being who's passed but is there, stuck in the miserable realm of hungry ghosts, we call them petas. The negativity with which they lived, the attachment, the greed with which they lived, was so saturated. And as you're passing through a place, a building, an old building or something, if you're sensitive enough, you will feel something, a coldness, or you want to avoid that place. This would be the opposite of what I was describing in the case of the Devas. But people have a tendency of validating the negative experiences than the happy ones. I'm saying let's focus on the happy ones because they do exist. If you believe cats exist, Devas for sure exist. Lord Sakka does exist. And they love to hear the Dhamma, by the way, when it's genuine Dhamma. They love it when they will cross the galaxies. For them it's nothing, it's instantaneous. By the way, after, just to briefly about Lord Sakka, afterwards when he was told as to the reason why, he started engaging in good deeds towards the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis and Lord Buddha, of course. And he definitely wanted to, because he was very much scared, because he had those I was going to say symptoms, but those signs appeared in him. His luster disappeared, and there was a bead of sweat. His armpits became sweaty. And these are signs that he's about to die from that position. It's a position, Other beings, Lord Buddha says many a time, he was born as Lord Sakka in his past lives. Not just him, but others too. If you have enough good deeds done, when the previous Sakka dies, you become Sakka. It's a position, like a king or a president, or CEO of a company. These are, of course, trivial examples, but he engages, he first asks question because he's terrified. He says, Bhante, he comes to the Buddha, he says, Bhante, I know I'm going to die. Teach me the Dhamma so that my heart's wish is for me to regain my position and be reborn as Sakka. He was honest. That was his deep desire, but he also wanted to attain, he also wanted to understand the Dhamma, and Lord Buddha teaches him. And we have a discourse I haven't translated that yet because it's very long as well, the Sakkapanya Sutta, from the long discourses, at the end of which he attains Sotapatti, he attains stream-winning status, which is the first level of awakened ones, noble ones. It's Lord Sakka himself. And he began glowing. He reclaimed his position as Lord Sakka. He was reborn in the same position, basically, because his previous karma ended, and then he was reborn again into that state. So happiness does exist, and it's for you to enjoy. But you can't do that while you are stuck in your old views about life and what this is all about scarcity, about, what if, and living with agitation. No. You already have to live like a deva, as a human. That's why we practice the Brahma Viharas. It's not a sometime affair, sometime practice. So carry yourself as a deva. Be godlike in your behavior, in your conversations, in the way you feel especially. What are you entertaining in your mind? How do you relate to yourself when no one can hear you except for you? Happiness is there already the moment you start. And when you close your eyes for the last time, that is where you're going to open up your eyes. Lord Buddha says it beautifully. He says, as if transported there, as if led there by the hand instantaneously into that realm. And it's instantaneous. You don't skulk around, you don't loiter in other realms like in a limbo state. There's no such thing. Sukhiyoto.